Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have Court Merrigan, an agriculture broker and consultant from Boston, and you are with the company LandVest. Court, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Tracy. Very happy to be here today. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. And I'm excited for this conversation. As our audience likely knows, we are the largest real estate website in Canada. I don't often focus on that. We talk more about the farm business management, all those different areas on the show. So you are actually our first guest ever that is in the real estate industry. Funny enough. So this is exciting. You cover the US, so it's going to be an interesting conversation. So why don't we, before we dive into everything we want to talk about, agriculture, real estate in the US, can you talk about your background, where you're based, where you're licensed, and a little bit about your world?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm based at the moment in Boston, Massachusetts. LandVest is a Boston-based company. But I really work nationwide, and I am not from this part of the world. I'm not from New England. I actually came out here a couple years ago from Wyoming, eastern Wyoming. That's where I grew up. We had a farm in Nebraska and a ranch in Wyoming. It was right in extreme western Nebraska and eastern Wyoming. And so I grew up on the high plains, and we had a farm and ranch. So we had cattle. The primary crops were dry edible beans, corn, and alfalfa. And in that area, there's also a lot of sugar beets as well. And so that was where I grew up. My dad was in real estate. I went away from it for a while, lived abroad for a while. I was a philosophy major in college, so not a lot to do with. I was like a rubber band. I went as far away from home as I could, and then I came back. And then I lived back at home in kind of the eastern Wyoming area, where I worked in real estate. I worked for a regional bank for a while as a farm manager before I came into brokerage full time. And then the last couple of years, I had this opportunity to come out to the East Coast of the U.S., live in the Boston area, work in the New England market. But I still also work out west. My business is probably about half and half between the American Northeast and the Mountain West states. So Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, Idaho, Nebraska, those states. But I do work elsewhere as well. I chase deals wherever they occur.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to go all over in this conversation. Why don't we look at your perspective? You're always boots on the ground, working with people, buying and selling. How's the last couple of years been for you guys in the States, real estate wise? Is it hot?
Well, so of course, when we're talking about the agriculture market in the United States, we're talking a gigantic, right. I mean, so much variation. In the areas in which I have worked, there has been a lot of action. You're seeing a lot of money come into agriculture from outside agriculture, and we have the other thing that's happening, and I'd imagine the demographics are similar in Canada. You're about to have the largest land transfer in history as this older generation passes on, and either they're passing it on directly to their heirs, or they're selling it, or their heirs are selling it. Trillions of dollars worth of farmland are going to change hands in the next 10 years, in the next decade. And that has made, in the real estate business, volatility. There's just lots and lots of volatility. So everywhere you go, there's an opportunity for deals. And so I think a lot of that, what's happening there's some short-term things because of interest rates. I think we're going to talk about commodity prices, recently tariffs, that drives things in the short term. But long term, there's just this massive transfer of land that's taking place as we speak. So that's happening no matter what else happens.
Yeah. Interesting. Actually, one of the things that we talk about most on this show, and the reason I started the Impact Farming Show 7 years ago, we're in season 7, is because of transition planning. Yeah. People not doing it. And I don't get into my family history too much, but Needless to say, there was transition planning not done, caused some problems in the family. We know the story. It is not a surprise or uncommon. That's why I started this show. And same thing up here. It's like all the land still being held by the boomers. How do we get it to the next generation? Or is it going to get sold? So, yeah.
And if it is sold, who's going to buy it? And then who's going to run it? Who's going to run those? I mean, you sometimes hear nightmare scenarios about, oh, these corporations are going to come in and Bill Gates or someone's going to buy all the farmland, which A, I don't think is true. B, even if it did happen, who's going to farm it? Who's going to do it? Where's the knowledge? So it is a really gigantic issue facing agriculture. Sounds like in Canada as well, and it's also, as I'm sure, is the same as in Canada. It is so capital intensive. If you had $3 million to buy a farm, maybe you wouldn't buy a farm. Maybe you do something else with that $3 million. And so it is very difficult to get into the industry without some sort of leg up. In other words, not having it in your family somewhere. We own land. And my brothers and I own land, and we own it because it's been family land that we've grown the portfolio, but we had to have a base to start with. I can't imagine starting today and trying to grow it to the amount of acres that we currently own. And I think about it with my own kids. How are they going to, I don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see how it transitions.
I know. It's on my mind and my heart, and the show topic that comes up all the time on the show.
Sure.
Before I transition, I want to talk to you about interest rates and commodity prices. I think those kind of go hand in hand in that conversation. But one thing quick, in your area that you are in, where you grew up, have you seen a lot of people moving out from the cities during that pandemic time, COVID?
There was this great hope. So I would say of the two areas where I do most of the work, which is the Mountain West of the United States and then New England, you did absolutely see people moving away from dense urban areas. You hear horror stories here in Boston of people that went through COVID with 2 kids in a 2-bedroom condo in the city, like 1,000 square feet, just crammed in there. And so you had a lot of people that had the means to do so. So we had lots of deals that were like for little 40-acre plots, like they would subdivide up a ranch and sell off housing places to people. And a lot of those people were people coming out of cities and getting out and away. In New England, you saw Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, people buying all these homes up there. Well, it's kind of like the tide went out, and I feel like it's going back. You learn very quickly when you buy land in a place like, say, Wyoming, is it's cold, the wind blows, you're far away. There's no acai smoothie shop down the street, right? It's the country, and not a lot of those people did end up staying in the long term and ended up selling or are selling back into it. So, and there was certainly a lot of hope in rural areas that you're going to see this infusion of not only money but kind of talent and people sticking their kids in the schools and becoming a part of the community. It has not really materialized. Most of those people either treated them like second homes or have sold up and gone back. I shouldn't say most. I don't have a lot of statistics to back this up, but in my observation, there was a time, and it just did not turn into a tidal wave that lasted, that I have seen.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. And it's funny because there was the big get connected to your food source. All these people have time to grow a garden and then get some chickens. They moved out and they're like, glorious, we can milk the cow. And one quick story, Court, you're going to love this because it's the industry you work in. You sell the property to them and then you're probably selling it to somebody else. But you watch these people on these big homesteading accounts, and this one girl was having a literal meltdown about the amount of work with her chickens and pigs and milking the cow. And I'm in my head, I'm like, well, hun, that's why we have dairy farms. That's why our ancestors graduated out of that, and we have automation. But of course, I was polite and I didn't say anything. But
you were thinking in your head, because of course you were. You see that, the amount of work, even chickens. I grew up with chickens every day, 2 times a day. You got to go out and gather those eggs, and you got to scoop out the chicken, all the things. And I just, I myself am not, like, I appreciate that. And for people that can go back to the land and do it, we need those people. They're a part of the mix. I think it's great. I myself am not very sentimental about it because I grew up doing it. I remember what that's like, and So there's a
Yes.
reason things have become more automated, and because that work was hard, and I think to probably the point that the person you were talking about notice is it never ever stops, ever, 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 every single day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Anyways, I digress.
that's farm life.
Yeah, that's farm life. And it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about and what we've seen here. Everybody's like, oh, I'm going to homestead, buy my property. Whoa, this is a lot of work, right? So, okay, let's go on to interest rates and commodity prices. We've seen highs, we've seen stuff coming down. How's that been affecting your world demand?
That during that time of low interest rates, and I was just reading something about this the other day, that interest rate period that we saw in the US, basically from the housing crash 2008 2010 until circa 2022 2023, when they started to go back up again, was the longest period of the lowest interest rates. Are you ready for this? In 5,000 years in recorded history. That's never happened in that way for that sustained and long of a time. And it created a lot of distortions in the market, which we're now paying for, I think, and that's part of what's going on. When you could essentially get the bank's money for free. I worked on farm deals where there were guys borrowing money at 3%, 2.75% on a farm loan. Doesn't even begin to make sense, and yet that's what was happening. And that put some distortion in the marketplace. It created there's always volatility, as we discussed, but it created, I think, some false volatility around, because that money you couldn't not do it. And then you saw people overextending themselves on farm equipment. And as a result, that naturally, I'm not an economist, but what I understand happens is that increases inflation. And all of a sudden, just have a standard combine, $750,000. And you have how many acres you have to put through that machine just to justify owning the machine, let alone the cost of land. It ate through the value of, if you acquired land at 3% or 4%, but you had to make all these other purchases, it ate through that value, and now we're on the other end of the curve. Now interest is back to a more probably natural rate, 7% or so, and your combine still costs $800,000. The cost of land is still what it is, and the commodities have come back down. It's very strange though, because again, in a high inflation environment, that generally favors commodities. That's usually good for agriculture. One of the sayings that we have in the U.S. is, if it's bad for the coast, it's good for the middle. It's good for the Corn Belt. It's good for the farmers in the Midwest when things are not going so well on the coasts. But that is, you've got high inflation and still have low commodity prices. So someone make it make sense to me, because I don't. Everything you ever read in a textbook, you kind of can throw out the last few years.
Yeah. And I think that just adds to the confusion, instability, fear in the marketplace. So that naturally leads us to right now. What's the feeling out there? Are buyers wanting to buy? What do you figure?
I think, there's opportunity in the marketplace right now, but it is opportunity that's coming from a place that is difficult. If in the United States, if you're staring down the barrel of $4 corn, $4 a bushel corn, that is probably below your break even, unless you're running a heck of a tight ship. And so that the corn you're sticking in the ground now is already a loser, unless prices go up between now and then. So you're probably playing the market. You've got some calls, you've got some puts. If you're sophisticated, you're doing that sort of thing to cover yourself. But that's a losing proposition as the tractor is running over the fields. And in that environment, it makes it there aren't a lot of people who are buying. But that also means not every operator, at least if we're talking straight farmland, is operating at that level. There should be some opportunity, some buy side opportunity for people who are able to weather their way through it. As I think, and we're just seeing kind of what I referenced earlier about the natural results of that low interest period. And now that not only is that over, but commodity prices are low and everything else, inputs. Talk about the price of fertilizer. We could spend the rest of the podcast talking about that. Your input costs are very high, and it's just going to be very tough to weather through it. When I used to work at a bank, we would talk about the burn rate, and that is the rate at which you burn through your equity in the land, floating yourself new loans to keep the operation going. At what point do you burn through so much of your equity that, you're paying the bank to stay in business at that point? And so that's tough. That's very hard.
You just led into a question I just thought of. are a lot of farmers, and we probably don't have the answer on this, but you look at the residential market. Interest rates were so low, people were going out buying big houses, and then interest rates went up. Even if they went up a tiny bit, I mean, we know in the day-to-day job world, people are living paycheck to paycheck. So now interest rates went up, people are losing their home. You just said that. I mean, how many, with commodity prices down, how many years can, rhetorical question because everybody's different. Are you, let's get to the point, Tracy. Do you think there's going to be a lot of farm bankruptcies in the USA?
I am not a doomer. Yeah. I know doomers though. they feel, I have read and I've read this and I've talked to some people that believe that the conditions are setting up to be similar to what the farm crisis in the early 80s in the United States was like. I personally am not that gloomy. I think there's too many unknowns to take that much of a stance. I mean, there's just too much going on with tariffs, trade wars, commodity price fluctuations, inputs. In theory, again, when the stock market, although it's back to where it was, is wobbly, people seek hard assets. They seek real estate, and so in theory, there ought to be some money flowing into that, and it ought to prop up some land values. I am not. I'm hedging on your question because I'm not quite as bearish as some folks out there are that are like just doom and gloom about everything. I think it's going to be okay, and I think your strong and efficient operators will do as they always do. They will adapt. They'll find a way. And on the far side of this, the ag economy will come out and it's going to end up being stronger. If you're in a difficult position now, it's not likely probably from what I can see, to get better anytime soon. But I don't know. This is what I love about agriculture. Farmers find a way. They find a way, and I think that will be the case this time too.
Okay. I didn't mean to quite get straight to the point, but I guess I like getting straight to the point.
Yeah, no, good. Right to the point's good.
I had another guest on, he's an economist and a speaker, and he said the same thing. He said the indicators are there of the 70s and 80s crisis. He said a lot of those same things are happening, but I think we should be okay. And again, it's farmer by farmer. What are your financials heading into this tight time, right? Are you over leveraged? Did you buy too much equipment? Right? We know as business owners, where are you sitting?
Yeah. And so again, it's very, very dependent on individual operations. And, again, we're talking only about farmland. There's a whole, and we're talking generally commodity production. There's a whole other part of agriculture and beef production, which is where I also do a lot of work on ranches and things. I mean, it's high times out on the ranch right now. People are feeling good. Yeah. Very good. And I'm high-fiving every rancher I know, because listen, man, they have been through the ringer. They have been through it. And they're coming out on the other side of this, and they're going to experience a few winning years. Good for those guys, so on the ranch beef side, and I am not involved in pork and poultry. I couldn't really speak to that, but on the beef side, things are looking very, very good. And those guys are, they're making good money last year. They ought to make good money this year. And the fundamentals set up very well for those guys.
Yeah, we're beef farmers here too. And it's like, finally our time.
Yeah, finally, right.
I don't ever celebrate because, of course, when one's up, the other's down. And I never like to see that. But it's like, okay, here is our time to make hay, pay down some debt, make sure we keep it strong. So, yeah.
It has been, those were tough years. I mean, just think back a few years to the middle of COVID, what that did. And now you're on the far side of that. So some of those same factors that we were talking about earlier with interest and inflation are playing to beef's favor. And beef is also, we may get into some discussion of tariffs in a bit. Beef is, at least United States, American beef is pretty immune to tariffs, at your top end. No matter, I liken it to no matter what kind of the environment is, people are still going to buy Mercedes-Benzes. They're going to buy those things. Right. In the world market, people are going to buy American beef, tariffs or no tariffs, and the domestic market demand remains strong. So beef is very, very well placed. So an investment a year or two, 3 ago, or even in the current environment in ranch real estate is one that's paying off for some folks right now.
Right on. I agree. And we are cherishing it right now.
Yeah, cherish away, because it's not going to last.
That's what I said. And it's that, as as we all know, as business people, it's like, okay, This is not here forever. We keep the financials, work into this dollar per head. We don't go crazy. Let's, keep the boots on the ground realistic. So one place that I would love for you to go, I want to talk about water, and then we're going to go to political instability. And this is hard. When I first approached you, I said, let's do an episode similar to what I just did with Farm Credit Canada about Canadian farmland values. I'm like, I want somebody to talk about American agriculture and farmland values. And I obviously am smart enough to know that we can't do that, even to do a state by state. But can you talk, just when you started listing some of the deals you work on and areas and types of farm and premium land, it was quite neat because we don't even have those types of operations. So do you just want to share about some of the different and cool deals that you've done? And then we'll go back to all the serious nitty-gritty.
Yeah. So you've got, what we've sort of been discussing today is kind of what we would call commodity agriculture, both beef, and then you've got corn, soybeans, people that grow that sort of thing. But there's so much niche stuff in the United States. I'm right now in the process of selling a relatively large cranberry farm in Massachusetts. And that is a very, very niche crop. By the way, Quebec is blowing it up in the cranberry world. That is, there's a lot of really good production coming out of Canada, and it's in direct competition. At one point, Massachusetts cranberries that was the leading source of cranberries in the world. Now you've got a lot of coming out of Canada, Wisconsin, and in South America, they're growing cranberries. So it's an interesting time to be in that market. But you have in the Northeast, in the area where I am, like Boston, New York, these areas, at least close to the coast, near the metropolitan areas, you have land values that are propped up by intense development pressure. Every single farm you see within 100 miles of where I'm sitting now, there's a developer who would love to have houses sitting on that thing. You read a lot about the housing shortage in the United States, and so that makes land values higher than in the way that they're not in other parts of the country. And so, you also I've done, not a ton, but I've done some work on the other end of the country in the Central Valley of California around nuts, almonds, walnuts, pistachios, those sorts of farms. I mean, those farms are also extremely high dollar. There's a reason why they grow that stuff out there, because on a per acre basis, it's hard to beat an almond tree for profitability. Once you have made that initial investment. So there's all that sort of thing. You've got wine country out there as well. Down in the Delta, they're growing cotton, they're growing rice. They're also growing a lot of soybeans down there. And then you have, we'll get to the discussion of water. On the high plains, where I grew up, you've got very diverse farming operations. Like just where I grew up, there's 7 or 8 major crops that are grown. It isn't just corn and soybeans. And that diversity allows you to work within various markets and to hedge against, if corn is way down, but you've got another 500 acres of dry edible beans, like, Great Northern beans or pinto beans or something like that. That's a very nice hedge against, your other commodities going down. So there's just a tremendous diversity and tremendous opportunity for people who are looking to invest in those sorts of things. But you have to go back to what we were talking about earlier, transition, you have to have the people then who know what they're doing. Growing cranberries is a very specialized skill. And, I know about it from brokering some deals, but I don't think I could farm a cranberry farm. So it's things like that matter as well, the know-how.
You have a fantastic job. I'm taking a lot of rabbit trails because
it's
an interesting life. But I'm thinking about it as a farmer. Funny thing, we like going to other farms on our holidays. Like we get genetics from a farm in Nebraska, so we holiday farm life. And I'm just thinking, if I could go to every type of farm throughout my life, that would be like my holidays. Then I'm like, wait a minute, Court does this for a living.
Yeah. I get, in some respects, a farm is a farm is a farm, but in other cases, every farm is its own unique operation. And owing to the nature of my business, I generally work on larger and very complex deals. So just to briefly touch on that cranberry bog again, in addition to the cranberries themselves, it also has 4 wind turbines on it. It has a solar farm, and it also has a very valuable resource in this part of the world is sand and gravel that's used for various sources, and it has some deposits of that. So it itself is also very diversified, and it's very unique in that respect. So one day I'm looking at a bison ranch somewhere in Idaho. The next day I'm trying to figure out a net present value for a wind turbine operation in Massachusetts. So it's I'm all over the place. It is a great job, and it's all. Nobody pays me unless a deal gets through, but it's rewarding to follow those things all the way to the end.
Nice. And before we started recording, you were saying that you have clients up in Canada, and
I do.
LandVest does a lot of deals in the timber sector. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, LandVest got its start as a timber company, and so they do. We have any number of deals in Canada, and we work internationally. They just did a deal down in the Panama Canal for some teak, and then all the forest land in the United States. But we have a pretty good presence and I believe they broker deals and they manage it. Now I have to say, the part of the world, the high plains where I grew up, there's like 2 trees. So I don't know anything about timberland. I don't know. I couldn't tell you the first thing. I don't even know what kind of trees they are. But I know that LandVest as a company does a lot of work in that space.
That's cool. Okay, so let's go to water. It has been a hot topic. I know in the US, actually BC, Canada, water's coming up, I think, on the political spectrum, and then obviously hitting the farmers with regulations. And then I imagine this is affecting real estate. So do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, water is particularly when you get west of the Mississippi River, becomes a very, very charged issue. And there's different aspects of the issue, but the 2 biggest ones are, you talk about like your surface water. The thing you often hear about is the Colorado River, which starts in Wyoming, ends up in Mexico, and along the way it goes through a few little towns like Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Diego, and it is the water source for a lot of those metropolitan areas. But the single biggest user along that entire river is agriculture, like by far. It's almost more than 70% of Colorado River water that is taken is used for agricultural purposes. And if you are sitting in Beverly Hills right now, you're like, what do they need all that water for? Like, why can't we have this? So you can imagine there's a lot of, tugging back and forth on that. And they do things like grow alfalfa, which is a very thirsty crop, in the high desert in Arizona. And they do it because they can get like 6 or 7 cuttings a year down there because of the climate, because it's so warm. But also one might be tempted to wonder, why are you watering alfalfa in the middle of the desert? I'm talking like, the desert with like the saguaro cactus is right over there, and you got a, alfalfa field. So there's the future of the West, the American West, rides on water. And that's certainly land values follow that. And the other aspect of water is groundwater, the water that's pumped up and used, again, by far the single largest use. Municipalities use it for drinking water and for your, cook and bathe and all that kind of thing, and golf courses and all these sort of things. But by far the largest user of groundwater is also agriculture. And there are places, the Ogallala Aquifer, to take one example, that runs from South Dakota clear down to Texas. It's about 800 miles north to south, is in places becoming depleted. There's places in western Kansas and West Texas where it's no longer economical to stick a straw in the ground and pull water out of it, because it takes more energy to get the water up than the water's worth when it gets there. And some of that water is millions of years old. That aquifer took a very long time so it's not like it's going to rain 3 times and there's going to be water in that aquifer again. And so as that affects the business that I'm in, I have investors who take one look at those maps and don't show me anything in Texas. They don't want to hear the name Kansas. They're not going to invest in that area. There are other areas. The great state of Nebraska has managed their water in a very different way, and there are places where the aquifer is actually increasing because of good management practices. Also some geological features. But anyway, you put all that together, and it means that the future of production agriculture rides very, very heavily on water and its availability. And there are just certain crops. It's very difficult to grow good alfalfa in the east because it rains too much. Oh, yeah. And it's just, the growing season. A lot of these, it's hard to grow. If they could grow almonds in Illinois or, Maine, they would do that. But there are climactic requirements. But those are also very, very thirsty crops. And so adjudicating and figuring out all that water while also meeting the needs of, Los Angeles is going to be quite a thing that's in the mix. And that water itself and the rights to use it are themselves going to become very, very valuable. And if you've got a farm that's in one of those watersheds, in upcoming years, there will be knocks on your door as they look for water.
Interesting. Well, in California is prime example too, the almonds, and they were having the drought and then them running out of water. I was wondering if I was an investor looking to buy land and keeping an eye on the movement towards the green movement and the concerns and how much they're talking about water, I'd be like, yeah, maybe let's not look at those because
if you've got, but I tell you what, one of the craziest stories I've heard is, this is not a deal I was involved in directly, but I knew about it in the Texas Panhandle where water is at a premium. They're putting in a gigantic dairy in a certain area, and they just planned that they're going to run out of water in 30 to 40 years. And they're just like, then we'll just be done with this facility. We'll just walk away because they're going to grow the necessary like silage and things within trucking range. And they're just going to suck the aquifer dry in that area. They treat it like oil. And then when it's gone, it's gone. They're just going to move on. They're actually planning for that. I have pretty strong opinions about that. But regardless, that's what's happening in the market. And so those sorts of investments are there as well. And so to me, that seems like a strange way to treat an irreplaceable resource in that way, but that's what they're doing, so I'm told.
Interesting. Wow. I'm glad you gave that example too. Like these things I wouldn't even think of, right? It's like, okay, let's do this. We have a plan and then we call it quits.
Like, same way as you stick an oil well in the ground and you're going to take that oil till there's no more oil.
I guess so.
If that's how you look at water, then it makes perfect sense. And those guys make a lot of money drilling oil, and I think the thinking is they'll make a lot of money drilling water.
Interesting. Okay, are you ready to get a little bit political?
Oh my goodness! Yes.
We won't.
What a time in history to get political.
Yeah, let's talk about. I want to pick your brain on two aspects: the political instability. You're American, we're Canadian. We're not going to start fighting here. No need for that. But I'm curious how the instability, the trade wars, the tariffs are affecting farmers. Let's talk about what you hear, boots on the ground, and then let's go to real estate.
Yeah, in production agriculture, the effects, the people that are producing commodities, corn, soybeans, wheat, for goodness sake, it's disaster. I saw a thing on it's not disaster. I should temper my words, but I did see a thing on Twitter, or what is it, X now, where someone was feeding, it's $5 wheat. They had their steers out there grazing because why not? It's worth more as grass for these cattle than it is to try to harvest wheat. So they're out there in a wheat field at this time of year in that part of the country. It'd be nice and green and growing, and the cattle love it. It's good feed. It's got a lot of protein. So, if you are feeding wheat, that tells you what has happened to the wheat prices. And that's a direct result of some of this tariff talk, and a lot of farmers I know are some of the biggest pro-Trump folks for reasons that go beyond agriculture, I think, for a lot of them. But they are pretty willing, as I read the tea leaves and talk to people, to take some short-term pain that leads to long-term gain, like opening up China and, reducing some of these tariffs that the EU has had, these unequal tariffs that have existed over the years. Whether that's going to come to pass is, of course, an open question. And if it doesn't come to pass, or it doesn't come to pass in a way that is ultimately beneficial to agriculture, boy, you went through a lot to then just get a lot more. So
yeah, and I'll tread carefully here because, politics, as we know, it's like a team sport nowadays. Forget the policy, right? Forget what it actually stands for. It just seems, I've quietly said, because I don't talk about it too much, it seems to me when Trudeau got in here and Trump got in down there, it became like team sport, like really cult-like, like your leader. And it was just different. So I'm hearing a lot of Americans, and I guess every commodity, every person, every background, the Make American Great, tariff everybody, that protects us, raises our prices. So, that's even a dangerous conversation between you and I, right? Because...
Well, I can say that, it makes some sense to me to take on China as the United States, to try to find some, I don't have a comment that I'll public comment about what I think but antagonizing Canada, to me, I have been unable to understand what the logic is there, and there doesn't seem to me, particularly in the case of Canada. I can even see with the EU, there were certainly some inequalities there. There were some things that, moves that maybe could have been made. I don't know that if I was president, I would have done it in that way. But antagonizing Canada has been one of the strangest things to come out of this, because it just has seemed to me to be completely unnecessary. You guys are not even really a rival in that sense, right? We share a continent and an outlook and a culture, and it doesn't. That aspect of it has not tracked for me at all. And I have some contacts on that northern Montana, particularly those wheat guys and those cattle guys. Their trade is directly cross-border, directly, and all of a sudden, overnight, the border gets all weird, and you used to just hauling your cattle over and across the international line. This is what you do, and all of a sudden you can't do that, or there's all this weirdness around it. Very strange and super unnecessary, as far as I can tell. I don't get the rationale there, and I don't think it's done anyone any good. Some of those I have some Canadian clients who I mentioned to you before we were on the air, and we were very close to getting a deal done out here in New England, and as those rumblings began after the election, and I think the exchange rate went crazy for a while there, the deal blew up and it's gone. It vaporized into smoke. And that was purely a result of political machinations. There was no economic reason for that deal not to go through. But the Canadian buyer in this case, is like, I can't, not right now.
Well, that's a lot of fear in the market. And it continues. It's not like, okay, this is what we're mad about and this is what we're dealing with. This is the answer.
Yeah.
I think we're going to bump along for a little bit till we get this sorted out, right?
I think so. I mean, I think you've got a lot of, and even if everything reset back to normal tomorrow, which it's not gonna, there's still reverberating effects. And as you know, agriculture is such a slow moving, you got to be thinking in December what you're going to be doing the next November. And it's very hard to plan around these kind of things. And so, the farmers that I know, I think they're plowing ahead, literally, and you got to keep on chugging and hope that things sort of work themselves out. But I mean, farming is hard enough without introducing some of this volatility. That is, that part of it I don't understand, and so.
I agree. I did 2 really great episodes with guests where we kind of touched on this. I don't typically go deep into this, but same type of thing. And I don't like, as a business person, the words "that is not fair," or as a person.
Right.
It's like, Tracy, work hard, create your own destiny. But one of the episodes was by an author, Land Rich, Cash Poor. And the basis of his book is how farmers have always got left behind because of politics and policy, and how at each point this happened. And then the U.S. got mad at this country, and then the farmers suffered. And it's quite interesting. Sure. And I think a lot of people, just to wrap the political discussion off, a lot of people, again, depending on political views and commodities, are of that same thing. It's like, okay, EU, China, that makes sense. But Canada, US, like, there's so many synergies. So I think a lot of us are in the same boat on that.
Yeah, it doesn't track for me. It really doesn't. I think if you're gonna pick a fight with the whole world, I guess Canada's in the rest of the world. But it just seemed like maybe it's always you just kind of pick your battles. And I think, again, there's issues to be worked out with China and the EU and other, Korea, Japan. There's some things, the Middle East, but I just had never had Canada on the list of like problems we needed to solve, So,
Our little Canada over here. We're just trying to do our best.
It's so. Well,
that's a big conversation, and I mean,
I'm sure.
Isn't it? Even to go into it, you almost like, and that's well beyond my pay grade because I don't get that political, but even to talk about that, you need somebody that knows commodity by commodity, country by country, history of all the deals, all the numbers. That's quite the big conversation, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so then you touched a little bit on farmers, and you touched on the real estate end a little bit. You've had deals that have fallen apart. Is there a lot of like chilly boots, I call it, in the market because of this?
Oh yeah, yeah. It seemed to me for about 17 minutes after the election, like some money had shaken loose, right? And people were feeling pretty optimistic, and it was almost kind of like whoever the winner was, at least now we know. And now we can move forward. So I don't know that had to do with Trump so much as it just had to do with what appeared to be now we've got some understanding of what's coming down the pike, except as it turned out that no one had any idea what was coming down the pike. And some of this stuff, has no one could have seen it coming, Doge and all these things that are going on. So yeah, absolutely, some money has gone off the table. But I do feel that was in the short term. But I do feel like some of that's sneaking back in. I don't know if you saw, was it yesterday or the day before, Moody's downgraded the credit of the United States. Now they were the last agency to do so. Treasuries went through the roof. As a direct result of that. And I think there's some money which is looking for places to go. Now, equity into agriculture has its challenges because of the management piece, and you've got to sort of know what you're doing. It's not like you're just buying a stock, just buying AT&T when you get into farmland. But I do think that there's some money looking for a home. I think that some of that will get directed into the commodities markets, and I think you'll see some. My most far out prediction I would make is you're going to see some distortion in the commodity markets from the paper traders as some of the refugees from the stock market and other places come over to commodities to try to make a buck. So all that as it influences real estate values means that that the theme for the last 5 to 7 years, you go back to right before COVID on, has just been volatility. I think you're going to just continue to see things bounce around, and the only uncertainty is that nothing's certain right now. So, all the things you thought you knew, it turned out you didn't actually know.
Funny enough, we're still middle age, I guess you would classify us, 40s, whatever that is. We've been farming for, I think, about 17 years. And even in those 17 years at the beginning, everything seemed, we had drought, we had craziness in the cattle and BSE markets and that kind of stuff, but everything seemed to move slower. Right?
Yeah.
It was just a little more predictable. Then the pandemic hit, and it just seems like it's no holds bar anymore in this world.
Well, I don't know if in Canada you experienced the same thing during the pandemic, but the trillions of dollars of injected money, in terms of the payments and the bailouts to the companies. And all of a sudden, like the concept of a bottom line. I myself was working in farm management during a portion of the pandemic, and I did a bunch of those loans for farms because they were basically shoving them at the government was like, take the money. Who's not going to take the money? And that distorted things in a way that I think we're going to see the effects of that for a very, very long time to come. It was unclear even at the time that people were taking like those PPP loans, were they going to have to be paid back or not? No one knew. Literally 0 people on the planet had ever experienced what we were going through every single day. But the government was simply shoveling money into the marketplace. And so it just really changed and rewrote the rules. So to your point about, you used to be able to count on certain things being true. It's just very difficult to count on those things. And so as to what's going to happen, and then you put that together with what we discussed earlier about the boomers and this transition going on. It's interesting times. And in my business, it means that I'm plenty busy and I don't answer every single phone call because only so many hours in the day, so.
Well, Court, I know I'm busy enough, but your job sounds so interesting. You can just send me out to scope out all these neat farms across the U.S.
Listen, at a certain point, there comes a point when I'm going to need to be in Massachusetts and Wyoming and Texas on the same day, and I'm not sure how I'm going to be in all 3 of those places.
There you go. Send Tracy. She always likes a good business trip.
Yeah, listen, looking at all these farms, it's a blast. I never would have thought. Growing up on our little operation, we were not that big, in western Nebraska and eastern Wyoming, that I'd be cruising around the country checking out these gigantic operations. I'm working on a ranch in Wyoming now, which there's a lot of public land involved, but there's over 1 million acres in one operation, and it's 120 miles north to south. That's a big chunk of ground. So that by itself is super fun to look at. So I get a lot of opportunities to see a lot of American ag, and it's been great.
Cool. One last question, and this will be, I guess, a bit rhetorical because we're seeing it out there. You're talking about maybe advice, what you're seeing if farms are diversified
Hmm.
in today's age, that's probably a good thing, right? It seemed like, correct me if I'm wrong, my grandparents, they were diversified. He was crops and
Yeah.
beef. And then everybody, they're like, no, we're all crops or we're beef and forage, of course. But it seems like there was that generation that just went all in, probably because the cost of land and equipment, you had to
Sure.
choose. But you're hearing a lot of rumblings of, oh, with commodities down, it would sure make sense to have 100 head of beef right now,
Yeah.
right?
100%. Well, if you are a corn and soybean guy in Indiana, say, boy, that's a tough world to be living in right now, because all of a sudden China's not taking your soybeans and the price of corn has tanked, and that's all you've got. My perspective on the thing is a little bit unique, because the area that I came from, as I mentioned, we have 7 or 8 major crops in addition to livestock, beef. And when I was a kid, also there were potatoes and vegetables like peppers, like bell peppers and things, onions. People grew onions. And I think the climate there favors that. We could go back to that sort of thing as long as there was an output placement. But yes, having that diversity of economic base, I mean, if you only sell one thing, that's great until the day that thing doesn't sell or the price goes down. Yeah. And it makes you effectively a price taker in the market. You have no... Again, your prototypical Corn Belt, Midwestern corn and soybean guy there's no leverage there. You're a price taker. Yeah. What can you do? If you're diversified, there's lots of other, always have other moves you can make, right? You can always have the cattle go here. You can, pivot to sugar beets or something. You can lease out, trade out leases of different crops that work rotationally together to create, good soil health over time as well. And so in general, a diversified operation is, I'm biased because that's the kind of environment I grew up in, but I think it's very good. It also means you got to have farmers who know their business, and those guys are, they're increasingly difficult to come by. So that's the other side of that.
Yeah, you hear a lot of rumblings now. Maybe my generation, a little bit older, where they're going, maybe we don't want to be all in on this commodity. Right. And it's not quite the golden child that it used to be. Canola. Yeah. People in Canada, that's one of our biggest crops. And we just got tariffed by China. Different things are always happening. It's like, oh, should we add a little more diversity? So you hear people tweeting around online going, let's think about this.
Is canola one of those crops that's considered to be a seed oil? Is that? So all of a sudden, for some reason, like people are like, oh, seed oils, those aren't good for, so it's almost like one bad news cycle and crashes the, and sometimes that works the other. Remember when quinoa, everybody in the world had to be eating quinoa? Oh, yeah. Which I think that comes from Peru or whatever, but for 10 minutes, that was the great thing. So had you ripped up your farm and planted quinoa, that would not have been a good bet the very next year, right? Somehow be able to do that. Yeah. So, but it's tough with those crops. And if you are all in on something like canola, and then the Surgeon General issues a report saying you should avoid seed oils, that's bad for your business, right? Even if it ends up not ultimately being true, headlines are not your friend there.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because just on the market and trade, diversity might be good. And again, there's costs and is it feasible and blah, 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 all those considerations. But you just nailed something that is so incredibly important. Not only do we have to worry about politics with new policy, trade deals, tariffs, weather, all of that stuff, we are at risk of food fads, which has always kind of been here. But now they take off like wildfire.
Sure, right? Fueled by some social media. Some TikTok influencer publishes something. Right. Cranberries, to go back to that briefly, were a fruit a crop that really benefited from some of that. Remember, there was a time when drink cranberry juice and it's the best thing for you and it's super healthy. Yeah. It blew up. All of a sudden, they opened markets up all over, and then as the trend changed, the price followed it right back down. And so it's those, you can be on both sides of that trade, but food fads, by their definition, aren't going to last. So, having that sort of crop is tough over the long haul, I would say. So I think that's your argument for your corn and soybean guys. They're going to say, well, you're always going to need that. True, to some degree, but, diversity.
Yeah. So. Interesting conversation, Court. This has been fantastic. So
it's been great.
I'm going to hold your feet to the fire here and get you to put on your wizard hat. So what are you thinking, feeling, hearing? What do you think 2025, 2026 holds?
Well, I mean, I think I won't be going out on a limb if I say it's increasing, ongoing volatility.
Yeah.
But I'm super bullish, I think, on agriculture in general. There is no one, and I would include Canada in the basket of what I'm about to say. There's no one that does it like the American farmer. We have faced stiff competition from Brazil, from Turkey, from other parts of the world where they're really upping their ability to produce, and they're turning out better and better crops at lower and lower prices. But the American farmer has met every challenge thrown at the industry for the last 100 years, and I feel good that we're going to be able to come through this too. And you're not ever going to go wrong investing in farmland, because not only, the old saying is they aren't making any more of it, which is true, but because of the way that it is done here and the strengths that the American economy brings to this production. And also you have a government which, for all its missteps, in the end is extremely favorable to farmers and to agriculture, and looks very favorably upon that, because it's food. In the end, it's food. You got to have. We have a policy, as I'm sure you do in Canada, of food security, and as long as that is in place, then that farmland is always not only going to hold its value, but always be an integral part of the economy. And so I feel these challenges now are going. There's a bit of creative destruction, which normally I don't like that term because it's too callous. Oh yeah, you're going out of business, but it was for the greater good. Well, that doesn't do you any good, right? Everyone's on a lifeboat. Like, sorry, we don't have room, but we're going to be okay. That doesn't make you feel any better if you're still in the water, But these things, these contractions, and these even recessions and things are necessary parts of the market that allow us to move on to the next thing. If what we used to be doing was so great, then nothing ever would have changed. Right. So there's always some. So anyway, I'm bullish. I think that we're going to work our way through these things because we always have in the past.
Love it. Court, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad we connected. Just a different view. Literally, you just see different lands and different operations. So it's just been so neat to hear you and pick your brain on real estate in the U.S. So thank you.
I really appreciate it. And thanks for having me on. I'm all things ag all the time.
If you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did, like it, share it, and get it out there so other farmers can hear what Court had to say. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.